This is the 565 cutting guide for the Dremel, and in my opinion it is one of the most useful attachments that you can get for your rotary tool. The main function of the cutting guide is to make the Dremel stay perpendicular to a flat working surface. This will help you to make cleaner and more accurate cuts. It will also give you the ability to do a wide range of new tasks with the Dremel, like for example routing wood, making inlays and sanding straight edges. The attachment is made up of 5 parts. This is the base that will rest against a flat surface. The base has one larger and one smaller hole that helps you to see what you are doing. This little nut is used to secure the screw and sits inside of this little slot. We also have a little spring. We will slide this onto the screw before we secure it to the attachment. And lastly, we have the depth gouge. This is placed inside of the base with the flat part facing up. On the depth gouge there are some measurements. I don't really use them much because it is easier to just measure by eye. To lock it at a certain depth, you just tighten the screw at your desired depth. But make sure that the screw sits inside this little groove on the side. These are the types of bits that works best with the cutting guide. Thin bits with cutting or rasping edges, depending on the use case. One important thing to mention is that you have to secure your bit to the Dremel before putting on the attachment. And also the large 1/2 inch sanding drum will barely go through the depth gouge, but it will go through. The cutting guide can be used for cutting through thin wood. And by thin, I mean wood that is not thicker than 1/4 of an inch or 6 millimeters. For cutting wood, I prefer to use the 561 spiral cutting bit or the 562 tile cutting bit. You can also use some of the routing bits like these ones. To demonstrate, I will cut a straight line through this 1/4 inch plywood. First, I secure the plywood with some clamps over the edge of my workbench. Then I set the depth of my cutting bit to about half of the thickness of the wood. I use a high RPM when cutting wood. This makes for less vibration and a cleaner cut. Now I just use this plank as a guide to make sure that the cut is as straight as possible. After the first pass, I increase the cutting depth of the bit and do one more pass. This achieves a fair enough cut, but it is by no means perfect. For cutting through thin plywood, this works fine, but it is hard to get a clean cut with a rotary tool. If you want to make cuts in thicker wood, I would recommend using something else than a rotary tool or a Dremel, because the tool is not really designed for cutting through that thick of material, and it makes an insanely high-pitched sound and wears out the bit. I mean, it will cut through thicker material, it's just not gonna be an enjoyable experience. However, I can recommend the Easy 544 wood cutting wheel for cutting through wood. This one cuts wood like butter, and you will achieve cleaner cuts with it. But it cannot be used with the cutting guide. If you have ever seen a drywall router before, you will notice that a Dremel with the cutting guide attached looks very similar to one. So the cutting guide basically transforms your Dremel into a drywall router, especially if you have one of the cordless models like the 8220. In the cutting guide kit you will get 2 types of bits, the 561 spiral cutting bit and the 560 drywall cutting bit. The 560 bit has no cutting edge on the end and is designed to follow the structures behind the drywall when cutting. This is very helpful when you want to cut out holes for electrical outlets and light switches. The 561 multi-purpose cutting bit has a cutting edge on the end which can be used to plunge cut into the drywall. But it will more easily damage wires and is not that good to follow edges with because it will damage and leave marks on the material. This bit will also cut wood, as you can see here. Also, the 562 tile cutting bit works great for cutting drywall as well. The cutting guide turns your Dremel into a mini router, and it's actually very handy for doing some minor routing jobs. For routing, we have a bit set that looks like this. Some bits have an edge guide. You can see the little guide rail on the end of the bit. These are used to contour edges. And some of the routing bits is just for cutting into wood in general. They come in different shapes and sizes. But these bits do not have an edge guide. So if you want to create straight lines with these, you need to use some kind of a fence. Let me show you how to make a small picture frame like this one with the edge routing bits and the cutting guide. First off, I will use a round profile cove bit to shape the inside of the frame. Then I use a round over bit to shape the outside of the frame. Then I use a rabbet bit to shape the back side of the frame where the picture and backing will be. Now we have a wood profile that looks like this. Now we just have to cut 4 pieces that are the same lengths with 45-degree edges. This will make a perfectly square frame. Sand away the rough parts, glue them together. Wait for it to dry. Then we clean up a little bit of the rough part, and now we have a cute little picture frame. The routing bits work fine for small little projects like this, but don't expect the greatest quality cuts from these bits. The cutting edges are not the greatest, so some tear out and impurities is to be expected, but most of it can be cleaned up with some sandpaper. Doing inlays is another good application for the cutting guide. Normally, when doing inlays in wood, we would use a woodworking router like this one, or a CNC router if you're lucky enough to have one. But we can still do some cool looking inlays by freehand with the cutting guide. A good way to make inlays with a Dremel is to first trace the pattern you want to make onto the wood. Then you choose a bit for removing material. I like to use one of these flat routing bits with a cutting edge. I then set the depth of the bit. In this case, we will do a shallow cut, about 2 mm deep or 1/16 of an inch. When routing, I like to use a high RPM, anything above 30,000 RPMs. First, we want to remove most of the wood inside of the lines, but leave about 1 mm of material when you get close to the line. We will clean this up last. When I have removed most of the inside material, we carefully cut away the material close to the line. Good lighting and a steady hand really helps here. After cleaning up the lines with some sandpaper, we mix the epoxy, add some color, pour the epoxy and let it cure. When the epoxy is fully cured, we can sand it down to reveal our beautiful inlay. One of the big downsides of using the cutting guide for inlay work is that the base is fairly small, so it will have less support when doing larger inlays. And that was about all the things I've used the 565 cutting guide for. Have a great day and see you in the next one.